Hello and good evening. This is John Bellingham with Monarc Construction. I'd like to welcome you here tonight to the House of Sweden to celebrate our first 25 years in business. I'm standing on the steps of 8349 Colesville Road, and this is where Monarc Construction started on February the 23rd, 1987. When we first started the company, there was a big debate about the name of the company. What would it be called? And the preference seemed to be the one to call it Monarc Construction, which would have been a great honor, but it would never allowed us to expand as a third-party company. So I drew up a list of names. One of the names on the list was Monarch with an H. And we had the emblem, the butterfly, and we submitted it, and they loved it. So it was a great idea. So I was told to get a company registered in Texas. I tried to get a Texas corporation, couldn't because there was another company by the name of Harvey Monarch. In those days, they wouldn't let you have more than 6 digits on a vanity tag, so I couldn't figure out how I could spell Monarch with an H and put it on a vanity tag, because there's 7 letters in Monarch with an H. So I was out running one morning. As I was running down the street, I thought to myself, well, Americans don't spell color with a U. Why would they spell Monarch with an H? So we left the H off and put the butterfly on, and that's how the name came about.
And I hired John I hired John from Siegel Construction way back when, and I thought I was going to get threatened with my life to take him away from there. He's so respected in the industry, he's so respected there. And but it was a great venture for us to form Monarc Construction. There was 3 or 4 of us, Dick Michaud and I, and we all formed it. And we put John in the middle, and it was interesting the first couple of years because it was hard for John to tell cash flow from profit. Basically, there was no profit. It was all cash flow.
I first joined Monarch in January of 1988 after meeting John and discussing with him the upstart company that was going on, known as Monarch, and functioned as the chief estimator and later the vice president for estimating at that point. It was an opportunity to work with a startup company that was exciting. That's what got me involved in the first place.
And we would sit around that conference room table, and it was sort of like we were, kids coming out of college, because the line was, all right, we got this company now, let's sort of set it all up. What are we going to have for a policy manual on contracts? What are we going to do for training? Who do we want our clients to be? We envisioned certainly at that time that the clients would be Trammell Crow related, and that was really the vision of the company. But we're looking at the third-party clients and who they might be and what we were going to establish for relationships. And I remember, how that was a really exciting time for me. It was starting a company off the ground, and I felt like I was basically a member of a board of directors that really wasn't there, but I certainly didn't feel like just a lawyer, and that was a pretty cool time.
When John first came on the scene at Trammell Crow, we were a company that built garden apartments. We developed them and we built them, and that was it. John burst on the scene with his intensity and his directness and his honesty, all just at the right time.
I came back to the job site around 4 o'clock after the job was closed, and walked along the M Street, and I look up and I see this huge crack running diagonally down the side of the building. I said, wow, that wasn't there before. So I go around, open the gate, walk inside, and the building is raining down plaster. There's actually stuff falling, and I'm saying, wow, this is not good. So I get on the phone with whomever I could get a hold of, call the engineer, call my project manager, call John, and basically everyone tells them, well, it sounds like the building's going to collapse.
He called me one morning at 3 o'clock in the morning. We had a building down in Georgetown. He said, you want the good news or the bad news? Well, this is 3 in the morning, so it's got to be all bad news. And so he called me and he said, hey, the face of the building is still standing. The bad news is it's got a 30-degree list.
We're right on M Street on a Friday evening during rush hour. So I said, oh, okay, let's see how we're going to do this. And it just happened to be a DC policeman across the street in a little tavern. I walk over there, just had my hard hat on, walked up to the guy and says, you need to close this street down because the building across the street is going to collapse. And he asked nothing, he didn't say anything. He got in his car, pulled across M Street and just blocked the whole road off.
The building was collapsing, and that's how the call started. Well, instantly, John didn't think about anything else other than trying to figure out how to save and solve that problem. We put a crew together, we went down there, the whole crew crawled into some pretty ugly, messy situations, and we shored up this building the best we can, and worked through the night to do it without hesitation. that's who he is. He never thought about where he was going to get paid from, how he was going to deal with any of the situations. He just thought, solve the problem, get it done.
And in the end, the job turned out great. It was a beautiful building. The client was happy. We were able to save this historic structure. It was just an unfortunate incident that happened caused by a subcontractor. But it was quite an interesting start to a young company.
As the market turned in the late 80s and went down, we decided that there was a little bit of cash in the pocket, and John had worked so hard, that we would give John Monarch. And so we signed it over to him, and he worked hard and diligently.
We had a walkthrough that John and I were conducting just on our own at the Slovenian embassy, and we were about 80% done. And we get an emergency phone call from the Slovenian embassy saying there was a delegation coming and they were on their way to the building just to walk the building. Most companies I've worked for in the past, the owner of the company would simply make a few phone calls and have laborers descend upon the place to clean it up and get it spruced up for the delegation. I turned around to see where John was, and there he is pulling weeds out of the front plant bed, grabbing a broom, sweeping off the front entrance. He didn't think 1 second about calling anybody else. John basically ponied up, did the work himself, didn't think twice about it. And that's kind of how Monarch works, and everybody does the same thing in this company.
One project that sticks in my mind particularly is the renovation of the Australian ambassador's residence. The building had been the former residence of General Patton, and over the years the entrance to the embassy residence had become a little bit tired, and it was decided that due to the increased need for security that a driveway would be redesigned. It was a design build project, so Monarch was responsible for the selection of the materials. We'd proposed using a red brick paver to blend with the facade of the building. However, the ambassador's wife decided she didn't like red, she wanted brown, so we provided with samples and she selected them, and the project was completed using the brown pavers. About a month after the project was completed, we received a phone call from the embassy saying that a gentleman was coming from Canberra and I needed to meet him at the embassy residence first thing on the Monday morning. So I arrived at the embassy residence and met with the ambassador's wife and the representative from Canberra. He seemed a little bit concerned, and he said to me, "Mr. Bellingham, why did you use brown pavers instead of red?" And the ambassador's wife, without a shadow of doubt, jumped in. She said, "I told Mr. Bellingham to use red pavers, but he insisted on using brown." And that only goes to show that after she really stuck the knife in and said, "And I told him he had no taste," that the customer was always right.
In the past, we were the general contractors. We had our own construction team, and we got to do our business well. When this job came, it was so complex. We had never done a restoration, historical, or any type of restoration. So we wanted to have someone who not only had the expertise, that had this sensitive ability to deal with the uniqueness of this architecture and the nuances that were so evident, and we had to find someone that could work with us because we were not used to having partners. And John was the perfect fit for us to come in and work with our team in all its various components and provide the expertise and the competence to bring the job to fruition.
One of the more interesting projects for me, being a British subject originally, was the renovation of the British Ambassador's house. This was a very interesting job. The building was built in 1928 at the height of the start of the Depression, and it was designed by a famous British architect, Sir Edwin Lutyens. And it was actually built by Harry Wardman, the famous developer that had come from England back in the early 1930s. The project required us to renovate the 8 bathrooms in the embassy residence, and the project was divided into 3 phases. So the first phase was the renovation of the ambassador's private quarters. It required us to take out the concrete floor slab and to get to the piping, which was concealed between the ceiling of the ground floor and the underside of the second floor slab. This required cutting through a thick slab, and once we got the slab out, we discovered that it was full of asbestos. Apparently they'd renovated the building earlier and they'd dumped all the asbestos in the void below the floor. Once we got the asbestos cleared out, it was discovered that there was steel pipes intermingled with the bronze water piping, and we recommended to the embassy that we didn't allow this to stay this way, and then we should take the steel pipes out and replace them with a compatible material like copper. After much umming and ahhing, they decided they would like to change the piping. However, due to the tight schedule, it was imperative we get on with it very quickly. So we were just about to pour the slabs back to conceal the work we'd done when they said change the pipes. So we called up the plumber and said to the plumber, change the pipes quickly, so we need to pour the slab. Well, unbeknown to Monarch, the plumber did a very good job, but unfortunately he crossed the copper pipes and ended up with the hot pipe going to the cold faucets and the cold pipe going to the hot faucets. Not a problem. You can change it over, except where you have one fixture, as we did in the ambassador's toilet. Nobody had said anything about it until we got a call from the embassy butler. The embassy butler name was Chuck Berry. Now, Mr. Berry was a very tall, very proper English gentleman, and he called up and he said, he had a bit of a stutter. He said, Mr. Bellingham, he said, the ambassador's complaining about hot water in the toilet. And I thought for a moment, well, I can't resist this one. So I said, Chuck, I thought the ambassador wanted an English bidet. However, unfortunately, that Christmas we had to go back and saw the slab up and take the piping out and redo it.
If you're a contractor that cuts corners, you do not want to work with John Bellingham. John happens to put a job together, and he goes from one end of the job to the other in planning and helping people like us make sure that everything's done. EPA regulations, the zoning, the whole shooting match.
Where I see Monarch going in the future is staying strong in our roots with historic renovation, multifamily, embassy work. That's what our roots is, for what we know to do as a company, but also moving to do more sustainable design practices and work with more green elements. My little sister is currently doing a degree in environmental studies and is very interested in that facet of the industry, and myself as well, doing mechanical engineering and seeing the waste that sometimes happens in these buildings. There's lots of buildings in the United States that were built and are not very efficient and not built with efficient means, and we go into these buildings that have a good infrastructure and people tear them down, and that's embodied energy of materials and manpower that went into building that building, and you can always save it and save the skin of the building and make the interior work and add on. And I think that's a large thing that we're used to doing in DC with historic preservation, but it can also be done elsewhere. We have plans for a warehouse in Falls Church City to turn into our office. Some person, the average person, probably would look at it and say, "That's a warehouse. That can never be a LEED platinum building. That's it's a warehouse." But no, there's a lot of embodied energy in the structure, the footings, and it can be turned into an office space.